The challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. The World Health Organization is calling air pollution the new tobacco. It believes the health impact of air pollutants on our health is just that serious and that widespread. That assertion is supported by a Harvard study showing 1 in every 5 deaths is caused by exposure to fossil fuel pollutants, and that people of color and lower income are affected the most. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, we speak with a board member of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility to hear their diagnosis of the problem and their prescription for change. So this is a very important topic that is affecting all of us and to an increasing level, and we're very fortunate to have a guest with us who's very conversant with numerous aspects of this, and that is Dr. Chris Covert-Bowles, who's both a family physician and a board member, I think, of the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to. Thanks for inviting me.
It always helps, as we begin to go into a topic in depth, to get a sense of what attracted you, what motivated you. And so I might toss the question out first. What convinced you to go into medicine as a career?
As a kid, growing up in Massachusetts, my dad was a doctor, an eye doctor, and I think that kind of sparked an interest in it. And I saw him, feeling great about, helping people, and I thought that combined science and helping people and the magic of the human body, and so this kind of combined all of those. So after majoring in French at Dartmouth and doing the pre-med on the side, I went into family medicine, went to University of Washington. I thought family medicine for me is the perfect balance of having ongoing relationships with people, helping them get through health crises, and then kind of getting on the other side, and also being able to do procedural things that kind of keep both the mind and the hands occupied, and keeps it interesting in a big variety.
And as you went into your practice of medicine, you were drawn to this area of participation in Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. How did that end up converging for you?
When I got involved, as a student with Physicians for Social Responsibility to help try to prevent nuclear war, big threat that we can't just fix with, seeing patients day to day, that was a huge role that I really enjoyed. And then when we moved from Seattle up to Bellingham, I was less active, but we moved back, and then I got back involved with PSR, got involved with climate action, which I said is like the nuclear war that's already happening. When I saw our son struggling to breathe as a young kid, it was super scary to see your child not able to breathe, and I really wanted to make sure that never happened to anybody else. So that's how I got involved with the climate action part.
Tell us a little bit about the origins of PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility. What year did it develop, and how have you seen that grow in terms of participation of physicians and other health professionals?
Sure. PSR is the U.S. affiliate of an international group called International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which started back in the Cold War days, and it was a Russian, a Soviet, and an American doctor, both cardiologists actually, who joined together to try to prevent nuclear war, which was, back then it was, a very big threat between the Soviet Union and Russia. And so they got involved that way, and many years of a lot of actions to try to prevent nuclear war. And then we took on climate action as another big threat, and then more recently income inequality.
And how have you seen participation in the group change over the years?
So I think back a number of years ago, it kind of waned as once the Soviet Union broke up, and I think people's sense of the threat of nuclear war dropped a bit. Lately, with Ukraine and Russia saber rattling, it's actually gone back up. But we had made some progress, and I think people felt not as much threat, though it's still currently present. Me just being out of town, my participation dropped off. But then again, when I moved back and could be more directly involved, and when I heard climate action was a second focus, that I said that's where I really want to jump back in.
As we're seeing more publication, both in terms of my field, meteorology and climate, and your field in terms of health and the impact of that. Are you seeing more attraction on health professionals to say, this is something we need to participate in?
Yes, I think a lot of health professionals are seeing that it's really our responsibility to speak out on climate action because, we can treat our patients one by one, but to really have the bigger impact for the whole population, it really takes a much bigger level of involvement, which we can still see our patients and tell them about the things they can do for their own health and how they can help the bigger picture, but to take a bigger role in the more of the policy levels to make the bigger difference to help all of the patients, even the ones we don't see.
And we're going to talk about that, but what sort of response do you get when you bring it up with a patient?
I think everyone's pretty on board. I mean, it's hard to deny the immediate realities of all the climate impacts with the floods and heat waves and smoke and everything. So I think people are pretty on board, and so it's more giving them something simple that they can start doing and then kind of branch out from there. And I think people are very responsive.
Well, I was struck during the midst of the COVID pandemic, which none of us can forget, nor do we want to. But the 200 different medical journals, I think it may have been more than 200 medical journals, came out in the midst of the pandemic and said the number one health threat is climate change. What was your impression of that? And as a physician, what are some of the key interrelationships between climate change, environmental degradation, pollution, and health then?
So we know that climate change is, the military calls it a threat multiplier. Mm-hmm. So all the poverty, war, lack of water, all of these things are just multiplied, and lower income people and people of color are more adversely affected than other people. So it's just like COVID, it magnifies all the social inequalities that we already have and just brings them out more starkly. And I think in some ways we said, hey, when we really decide that there's something important that's a big threat like COVID, that we can really step up and do a lot. Almost like World War II, we had to do it. And we really, if we really put our minds to it, we can do big things. And then COVID was the modern, example of that. And I think a lot of us said, let's take that energy now and learn from that and, crank up our response to climate change.
During COVID, of course, we saw a lot of bad information coming out, a lot of denialism. Did you learn some lessons from COVID that you're also beginning to apply in terms of the environmental issues and how they relate to health?
I'd say especially the inequality part, just the inequality magnifier, and that we have to really be aware that people have different spheres of influence, and we really need to try to reach people where they are and the sources of information that they listen to, and really target the information in a way that matters to them. So for climate action, I say, yes, it's a big thing, and some of it's irreversible, but there's huge things we can do it's all stuff that we can do once we put our mind to it. It's not too late, we're not doomed. So there is hope, and we absolutely can do it, and it's really deciding.
How frequent have you seen that level of collaboration between that number of medical journals all pinpointing one given issue?
I don't think 200 medical journals have ever come out with a simultaneous editorial on any topic ever. I don't imagine. And it is the perfect, it affects everyone. We all breathe the same air. We all live on the same planet. There is no planet B, as we say. We don't have any spare planet to jump to, and we're not going to move to Mars, the whole population. So I think it really brought out that, all health professionals and everyone on Earth really has is called to make sure our planet is livable.
Has that level of collaboration continued or even expanded since those editorials came out?
Yeah, we're seeing more medical societies getting involved, and pediatricians leading the way, family doctors, lung specialists, all the ones you would expect to be part of it, but even anesthesiologists realizing that the anesthesia gases they use, some have dramatically worse greenhouse gas effects than others, and they can make a simple switch. There was one presentation to one doc who would drive his Prius to work every day and was very mindful of that, and they said, the anesthesia gases you are using by choice, there's other ones that are just as effective, just as safe. It's like you're driving a Mack truck, a diesel Mack truck to work every day with the greenhouse gas emissions with the gases you're using. And he immediately switched.
Yeah.
And so all the different professions are getting on board, and hospitals too.
Now your group, honing in on your particular group, you produced a video that pinpointed one local business and how their practices and customs were really exacerbating this problem. And what I'd like to do before we get into their impact in climate change and health is just take a quick look at an introduction to that video. So let's just take a look at that.
Hey Amazon, it's time to deliver change. Transport is now the world's largest source of new greenhouse gas emissions, currently responsible for almost 12% of all emissions worldwide. Global carbon emissions of last mile delivery account for up to half of total delivery carbon emissions. In addition to creating carbon emissions that fuel climate change, the exhaust from delivery vans during last mile delivery is in our neighborhoods and in our lungs.
What is the magnitude of the effect that all this new diesel pollution is going to have? Who is going to be affected? What diseases are you looking at, from asthma, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure? All of these things, who is going to be affected? How many cases are you going to see from all these diesel vehicles that are going to be passing through neighborhoods?
69% of Amazon's warehouses are built in neighborhoods with a disproportionately high number of people of color and low-income residents. In order to meaningfully reduce last-mile emissions and eliminate filling communities with exhaust, Amazon and other delivery companies need to commit to zero-emission deliveries by 2030.
Chris, when your group chose that focus, what led them to make that particular choice, and what sort of feedback did you get?
So Amazon and all the big companies in the world have the capacity to make dramatic, quick changes that we need to make to tackle climate change, to reduce their carbon emissions. It's not just buying carbon offsets and continuing to pollute.
Right.
They could do it. They have plenty of money. Jeff Bezos has plenty of money. And so they could shift very much quicker than they are to electric vehicles, to dramatic. They make a lot of good statements, but they're not doing nearly as much as they need to be.
Right. Do you ever hear anything back from Amazon directly?
They haven't called me yet. I don't know why. No, we haven't. And we're small potatoes to them. But I think the more they hear it from more people, I think the mass voice really makes the difference, I think.
I have to ask the question: do you still get deliveries from them?
So I am still boycotting Amazon, and they're still hurting really badly, I hear. My wife and son do, and we have that conversation, but I try to buy from the local company, local businesses wherever I can.
I was stunned when I first heard of a Harvard study, and I think there were a couple of other institutions that were involved in that research, that said 1 in 5 deaths worldwide are caused by exposure to the pollutants released by the use of fossil fuels or the production and access of fossil fuels. What was your reaction? Do you agree with that? Does that seem reasonable?
I sure do. So it's just not as, clear. It's not so obvious to people. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the heart attacks and, strokes, they can happen from all these particulates from all this diesel and other smoke. The wildfire smoke, I had a patient come in and he was short of breath, and we thought, well, he inhaled a bunch of wildfire smoke, but he had no pre-existing lung disease. His lungs were full of blood clots caused by wildfire smoke, small particulates.
Really?
They talk about those 2.5 particles. Those are the particles so small, they not only get into your lungs, but they absorb right into your blood vessels, and they'll cause heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots. So, and of course it causes cancer and all these things, so we know it's a huge toll. So there was a thing a while back saying, what if we tackle climate change and it's a hoax and we have better health and cleaner air for nothing?
Gee, that would be a shame.
So I said, of course, it's not a hoax, and we know that it'd be huge health improvements, and more jobs and all sorts of things, all sorts of benefits from tackling climate change.
What forms of cancer have been linked to wildfire smoke or air pollutants?
So I'm not totally up to that, but I would guess with particulates in the lungs, and a lot of the smoke ones from fossil fuels are carcinogens. So I'm guessing that lung cancer would be one of them. The kidney filters out our entire bloodstream, so we know at least tobacco smoke causes kidney cancer and bladder cancer. So I don't know that off the top of my head, but we certainly know strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots are directly related to bad air quality.
And you brought up wildfire smoke, and of course that's very timely as we sit and talk today. Last year, I remember coming home from a trip and had been in some fairly major cities, but Seattle had the worst air quality compared anywhere in the world, I think, was compared to Beijing and New Delhi. And that wasn't just a day or two. So maybe, and now we're seeing it this year, maybe expand a little bit more in terms of what both short-term and long-term exposure did. You gave a few examples, but as we see more wildfires, what is that doing to our health?
Yeah, so we know short-term, the best estimate I heard, about 400 people in Washington died from the wildfire smoke. Wow. There was maybe one, but that's the latest stat I heard. And of course, worldwide, it's enormous. And finally, the East Coast got a taste of what we've been dealing with for years and years when Washington, D.C. and New York, this wildfire smoke is a real thing. It's not just those Westerners anymore. So the plus side, I'm hoping that will create a lot more urgency and action on it, because besides tackling climate change, which we know the warming temperatures are drying out the forests, and the beetles are, surviving longer to kill the trees, and this whole kind of cascading series of things. We know that what we've done in Washington State and learned from the Native Americans who's been telling us for centuries, selectively thinning the forest and carefully doing careful selective burns to thin the forest and reduce all that fuel has a huge impact on reducing the giant wildfires that hit us. So Washington State is making some progress on that, and we're ramping it up and putting a lot of these lumber people back to work to help prevent these wildfires. So we know short term it's a huge thing. Long term, we know these disease rates in cities, the low income communities that are typically near big highways and places that are producing, in the south, fossil fuel facilities, refineries are typically closer to communities of color and lower income people because they have less power to prevent that. The huge disease rates that you can track people's life expectancy from from their zip code. So South Seattle has lower life expectancy than other areas directly due to the poor air quality. And
a lot of that originated with the old practice of redlining, and it just tended to snowball from there.
The redlining still has that health impact.
You mentioned you had a personal experience with this in terms of your son, I believe, having asthma. Have we not seen increases in asthma as children are exposed to more of these pollutants? What sort of things are you seeing in the medical literature?
Absolutely. Asthma is getting more common. Allergies and asthma have a huge overlap, so the allergy season is expanding and expanding as these plants leaf out earlier in the spring, so the ragweed and the pollens go up quicker. So a lot of overlap between allergies and asthma are affecting kids. We know older folks with the COPD, emphysema, bronchitis, they're having more of an impact. And again, the heart attacks and strokes go up with the more bad air quality that we have. So yeah, we're seeing worse air quality, and we think that as we bring it back down, we should see those rates come back down too.
And we've seen examples of that. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I have to ask you, as a physician, you're also a parent, and you're treating people on a human level. What impact does that have on you? What sort of emotional tug does that have on you as you see that?
Yeah, I hear people suffering very frequently, if not every day, so some of the suffering is amenable to some medications and things, but the big picture is having to step up and tackle these more systemic, large-scale things. But yeah, it has a huge impact day to day. So for me, getting out the guitar and singing some music, jumping on my bike, my little mini vacation twice a day and my bike commute really helps to kind of blow off that, that absorbed suffering. And,
Right.
you just hear people with, all sorts of health problems, and you hear and see the suffering every day. And some of it's kind of self-inflicted, and a lot of it's just the way the world is getting.
Yeah.
So, we say in WPSR that action is the antidote to despair, or activism is the antidote to despair. So that's why I say, stepping up and doing something that you can do in your daily life, be it at home, family, community, or more policy levels. At least you're doing something that's being effective.
And I see on your tie you have an emblem of your love of cycling, and I know of that. Have you run into days like last October? We had some beautiful weather there, but days where you say, it's just not suitable for me to cycle to work because of the air quality?
Well, I got my N95 mask that actually, they were in short supply. It was a patient of mine who's a building contractor that had better access to, a giant crate of N95, so he actually sold them to me for $1 a mask. So I wear that all day long in the clinic to try to not get COVID, which I haven't gotten yet. And I would, when the air quality is really bad, I just rode with my N95 mask on. It's kind of stifling, but I only go about 2 miles now. But yeah, I couldn't bear to not do it. So.
But I know as a fact that you cycle much longer than that.
Yeah, I do longer rides too.
Chris, we talked about the Harvard study. Is there some other research out there that maybe hasn't received the same level of popular attention that were as stunning as that?
Yes, now we know that home gas appliances, stoves, heating systems cause up to 13%, that's 1 out of 8, of childhood asthma are from having your gas appliances in your home. So we're poisoning ourselves with gas in homes. So definitely make sure you've got it as tightened down and as good as it can be. Ideally switch over to non-gas in the homes, and that's why here in Washington State our State Building Council has mandated that all new construction be gas-free. Now they're challenging that in court, of course, but we're one of the first states to pass a statewide electric building ordinance statewide, so that should have a huge benefit. There's a study that shows that those gas, even though you don't smell it, they're leaking out even when you're not even having them turned on. And it's like worse air quality indoors than would be legal outdoors. So some of our worst air quality is indoors from our own gas appliances. So yeah, we need to, ideally new construction for lower income folks to retrofit the old places, to have some government support and grants and subsidies to allow people to get off of gas poisoning. Making that shift.
When you were talking about the opposition to that, and we see that on virtually every level, has your group undertaken to try to get in contact or engage in dialogue with some of these groups and say, just hear our viewpoint on that?
Well, at the State Building Council hearings that, we were all in the same Zoom room listening to each other.
That's true.
And so they heard our piece and said, we're here for health. You guys can make money either way. And actually, they can make money, building either way. Now, if you're only doing gas, well, then, at some point, just like in years past, the horse and buggy folks, have taken a hit. And the steam engines, their manufacturers are, not around anymore. We changed our priorities. We said, the world needs to change. And, fortunately, there's more than one job in the world. I don't, make it a small point that, for a gas manufacturer, that's going to be, a change. And
right.
Fortunately, there's so many more jobs in clean energy and green and sustainable energy. That's the biggest source of new jobs. They're already way more than coal, and, solar and wind power is way cheaper than fossil fuel power now. So things are changing for our better health.
The clock is always a what shall I say, a detriment to conversations, but you've kindly agreed to go ahead and continue this with us. So we're going to do a second episode. Before we say farewell to our viewers on this one, viewers and listeners, the climate scientist E. Michael Mann, who is one of the great lights of climate science in the United States, he's from Penn State, has said that denialism used to be the biggest obstacle. And he now says doomism, a sense of doom, that we can't do anything, is the biggest obstacle to really achieving change. What's your reaction to that? Do you have any wisdom you'd like to share with people?
So we can do it. It's not too late. We can tackle climate change. A friend of mine who passed away said, you know, we all need to fall in love again with the person or the place or the experience or nature that would give us the strong enough motivation to do what we need to do for a healthy climate for our children and grandchildren. Because when we're in love, we can do amazing things that we don't do otherwise. And he says, you know, what is that for you and each person that enables you to say, you know, I'm doing this, but I can do more. And, you know, it's that important. So that's what I hold on to. And no, it's not too late. So I say yes, and, you know, there's still hope. You know, some of it's baked in, as we say, but we can absolutely, you know, avoid the worst effects of climate change. It's going to take all of us at the individual and the bigger policy level, but it's absolutely doable. So that's the good news.
Chris, thank you so much. Dr. Chris Covert-Bolds, and again, join us in next week's edition of Challenge 2.0. We'll continue this conversation. We'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the steps that we can follow to make a change. Thank you again. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
If you've enjoyed this program, found our conversations to be informative, entertaining, and thought-provoking, and the vision inspiring of people from different backgrounds who can disagree without being disagreeable, perhaps you might consider supporting our program with a contribution. Your support will not only help our program continue, it will also support the broader efforts of Paths to Understanding, our supporting parent nonprofit organization.